IU Matters, Race Relations is a co-production of Indiana University Office of the Vice Provost for Research, Indiana University Media School, and WTIU.
Race relations. How far have we come? Recent polls show more Americans believe race relations have dramatically deteriorated over the past year, and many don't think things are much better now than they were in the 1960s. Today on IU Matters, a look back at a pivotal moment in America's civil rights movement. And we'll look at efforts underway now to address race relations across the country and right here in Indiana. It's all next on IU Matters. Hello and welcome to IU Matters. I'm Ann Ryder. We are at a time in U.S. history in which a majority of Americans have a pessimistic view of race relations. Divisive remarks by the president, combined with a recent white nationalist rally in Virginia, have many more Americans saying race relations are suffering. Today on IU Matters, we take a look back and a look forward at this important issue. First up, Indiana's own Dan Wakefield. He is the nationally acclaimed novelist, journalist, and screenwriter who wrote Going All the Way, New York in the 50s, and Island in the City, The World of Spanish Harlem. As a freelance journalist, he covered the story of 14-year-old Emmett Till, a Chicago teenager tortured after he was falsely accused of whistling at a white woman. Dan Wakefield covered the murder trial in Mississippi, and he covered many other landmark civil rights events as well. You're going to hear terms in this interview that many people today find offensive, but they're a reflection of the language used back then. So here's my conversation with Dan Wakefield.
The first story I ever was assigned to cover was the Emmett Till murder trial. I knew that that was going to be a historic event because it was the first, quote, racial incident after the 1954 Supreme Court decision. And I had been reading all summer in New York that Emmett Till was a 14-year-old Negro boy from Chicago who'd gone to the Mississippi Delta to visit his grandparents. And while there, he had been accused of whistling a wolf whistle at a white woman and was then dragged from his grandparents' house in the middle of the night and was next found dead at the bottom of the Tallahatchie River with a 50-pound cotton gin fan around his neck, and he'd been badly tortured. His mother demanded an open casket funeral so people could see what they had done to him.
And it took the all-white jury how long to convict?
45 minutes, and we were told that the reason it took them so long was they couldn't figure out how to fill out the proper form.
What was you wrote a really interesting first sentence. You were writing for The Nation. Do you remember your first sentence that you wrote on that trial?
I do. The crowds are gone, and this sleepy Delta town is back to its silent, solid life that is based on cotton and the proposition that a whole race of men was created to pick it.
And that was 1954, correct?
That was 1955.
55, and after that, then what did you cover from a civil rights perspective?
Well, then The Nation magazine asked me to cover a number of things. I included I was in Montgomery during the bus boycott, wrote about the White Citizens Councils. I was in Little Rock when Governor Faubus closed the high school rather than having black kids go to the school. So 3 of the pieces I wrote in civil rights were in the New York Times volume of civil rights reporting.
So how far have we come in all these years in race relations?
In some superficial things, it looks nice, but basically, when I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, I realized something Baldwin had been telling me years ago, that the body, the black body, is not safe. And as I was reading this about by Coates, talking about his experience, where one of his classmates at Howard was was followed by a ununiformed policeman and shot and killed, and him realizing that he couldn't protect himself and couldn't protect his son. And it's that layer of things that I didn't understand when Baldwin years ago had said his sister suffered because she was black. I said, well, everybody suffers, but I realized there's this extra layer of fear that's very realistic.
Just for being black,
Yeah,
in a black body.
Just an instance, we had a showing of the Baldwin film, I'm Not Your Negro, at Landmark Theater in Indianapolis. And there was a woman there afterwards. We had questions. A woman said she'd been living in Fishers for just a year. She was a very attractive colored woman. And she said, I wonder why I've been pulled over by the police 16 times. So, you know, it's the old thing of driving while black. It's a danger.
And James Baldwin, famous author, was a friend and
Yes.
gave you a perspective on this that you didn't have before.
Yes, in fact, when I came back from the Till trial, and I said, telling him about it, I said, Jimmy, the amazing thing is the people in the town thought it was all right that the murderers went free. He said, you mean the white people in the town? I said, yes, that's right, because that's the way we're thought, and that's the way our history, which really tells us nothing of the reality of race relations in this country. And so it really goes back to the fact that when the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, that didn't jibe with slavery, so they had to regard the slaves as not men, not human beings. And then after a while they became 3/8 of a human being, and it went on and on. But we suffer from a lot of this in Indiana.
Right here in Indiana, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, Indiana had the largest membership in the Klan of any state outside of the South, and that determined a lot of what happened. We're right now, I was surprised to know one of only 5 states in the Union that does not have a hate crime bill.
They just tried to pass it, it just failed.
Yeah.
They said they will try again, but yeah, one of 5.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's pretty alarming. And I read a new book by Alida Hodge about Indiana Avenue, but it also goes into some of her family's history as a colored family in Indianapolis, and found that black people were not allowed in hospitals in Indianapolis until 1953. I had no idea of that.
And mortgages. They couldn't get a mortgage inside the state.
And a group of middle-class black people who had worked their way up decided they wanted to have a nice community and build nice houses. And they were all professionals, doctors, lawyers, or worked for the government. And they found that they couldn't get a mortgage in the state of Indiana. They had to go to Colorado to get their mortgages. That was in the 70s, so that was not that long ago.
Dan, I knew this would go fast. We could sit here for an hour with your experiences, but thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now to our panel of educators who have focused great effort in examining shifts in race relations. Joining us today is Carl Darnell. He is director of the IU Balfour Scholars Program, which supports underrepresented students as they transition to college. Also with us is Ellen Wu. She's an associate professor of history at IU. She authored a book examining the model minority stereotype of Asian Americans. And she's working on a second book now about the changing conditions and consequences of race-related policymaking. And Cara Doo also joins us on set. She is an assistant professor of cinema and media studies and history. Her expertise includes film, mass media, and African American history. She's the author of the book Envisioning Freedom, Cinema and the Building of the Modern Black Life. And my thanks to all of you for being here. Carl, let me start with you. A little bit about Balfour Scholars, which is new enough that we haven't had a graduating class yet here at IU. Tell us about it.
So the Balfour Scholars Program came to Indiana University in 2013. It was designed to help African American, Latino, and Native American students to be able to be ready for college, get access to college, and then to be successful in college. We provide wraparound support services to help the students once they get into college to actually feel comfortable, to get really connected to different programs and resources on campus, and then we stick with them until they graduate from college.
What kind of obstacles do they face when they get to college?
Well, there's a lot of obstacles.
A lot.
Of course, there's the financial obstacles, there's getting adjusted to college in and of itself, but once you enter college, a college such as Indiana University, any predominantly white institution, you walk on the campus and find out that you're the only black student in class, you're the only Latino student in your hallway, you're the only Native American student anywhere on campus. People will say different things to you. You'll find out that as you walk around campus, there's nobody on the wall, there's no pictures that look like you. Mm-hmm. You'll find that you don't have any professors who look like you. There's no visions of your possible self. There's organizations on campus where you don't feel welcome. There's buildings on campus that you know are named after races, and you don't feel welcome in those buildings. So what we try to do is talk to them about their culture, talk to them about themselves, talk to them about their identities, and how you can feel comfortable and confident being on a campus, on any campus, and to be able to thrive there.
Carl, thanks. Ellen Wu is a history professor here at IU, and as we mentioned, she's the author of The Color of Success, Asian Americans and the Origins of the Model Minority. You grew up the daughter of immigrants in Indianapolis. I want to get to this model minority. Tell us what that is and what that represents.
Okay, sure. So the model minority is shorthand for the stereotype that I think is pretty common in American life, which is the idea that Asians are somehow culturally endowed to succeed in life, to succeed in America. So they're like America's success story. You know, they work hard, they kind of put their head down and keep quiet. They don't make a lot of waves, but then because of that, they're able to send their kids to Harvard, right? And so this is, I think, a pretty well-known concept that has been circulating for about 50 years.
And the fallacies in that are?
Yeah, I mean, there are many fallacies. First of all, there are more than 18 million Asian Americans in the U.S. today. So to say that all of them are like this when they're from different places, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different education levels, have been in this country for different amounts of time. It's and then certainly have a host of different political persuasions. It's like painting any group with one broad stroke, right? But I think the core of that really is about telling a story about America, which is that people of color, if you don't succeed in American life, then it's because of you. You haven't worked hard enough. You don't have the right culture. So the subtext of that has always been about comparing Asian Americans really to African Americans, and then some of these other groups like the ones that Carl has been just talking about.
But listening to Carl say what he said, that there are so many Latinos and African Americans walk around and they don't see anyone like them. What are the differences between that and the Asian Americans here?
I think one thing we want to keep in mind is there are historical differences. So I'm a historian that explain different outcomes. And so, as a lot of sociologists will tell you, a lot of Asians today are recent immigrants, and a lot of them came after the 1960s when immigration law began selecting for immigrants with certain kinds of skills. So these tended to be, including my own family, highly educated, professional workers, right, and students. And so those are the families who tend to, put their children in college, and they have those kinds of skills and capital that allow them to have a kind of socioeconomic mobility.
Thanks. We will get back to you. I also want to go to Cara Doo. She is Assistant Professor of Cinema and Media Studies and History. And through the years, and you're a historian in this regard as well, through the years, how has cinema, has media been used in order to make an expression socially?
Well, African Americans began to use moving pictures during the turn of the 20th century. And it was part of a larger mission, a desire to kind of make visible a lot of social ills to raise money for Black organizations and to have fun together, which was a kind of a critical part of the whole rise of the moving pictures in the United States. So this all began during the era of Jim Crow segregation, when African Americans were either excluded from or forced to sit in segregated areas of motion picture theaters. And so they actually went out and they created their own theaters, their own spaces in the places that kind of function like public spaces for Black Americans, and that was largely churches. So early Black American churches were actually theaters for a lot of African Americans.
And we're seeing a clip right now from, I think it's Within Our Gates, is that correct? This was a movie that dates back, how long?
So Within Our Gates, I think came out in 1920. It's a film directed by Oscar Micheaux, who began out, he was a homesteader in North Dakota, and he basically decided to write novels, and then decided that from there, even though he had no experience at all making movies, that he would produce his own films. So he taught himself everything, he got some equipment together, and he made the first Black feature-length motion picture, which was The Homesteader in 1919, and then he produced this film here.
And how was that disseminated back then? How did it get to its audience?
So by that time there were Black theaters. Sometimes they were shown during midnight shows in white segregated theaters. They were brought in road shows across the country and shown in places like churches too.
Mm-hmm. Let's open it up to the round table now, and the whole idea is it's informal and a chance for you to even ask each other questions. Mm-hmm. But Carl, you told me something at the beginning. How well or underrepresented in this case are African Americans here on the IU Bloomington campus?
So the statistics show that African Americans make up about 4% of the undergraduate student body, about 4% of the graduate student body, and about 4% of the tenure and tenure track faculty on this campus.
I was stunned by that. That's surprising. And then how about at the IU campuses across the state?
So the representation at IUPUI is a little bit higher, of course, and at IU Gary, or IU Northwest is a little bit higher. However, it's not really representative. As I mentioned earlier, Gary is about 88.4% Black, but IU Northwest is under 25% Black. The question is, where are the African Americans being able to get a chance to get into school? How are we preparing our African American students, our Black students, for college? And once they get there, how are we supporting them so that they can stay in college and graduate?
Mm-hmm. Now we have so many issues of, immigration is getting teed back up this very week as we talk about it. How does that impact what you are teaching and how you're teaching it, Ellen?
Oh, the immigration issue?
Yes,
well, I taught a
yes.
class last semester on immigration, and it's a tough one to tackle because it's such a hot button issue. And really, as a teacher and a scholar, I want the students to have a chance to explore the different viewpoints and evaluate them, but also to put them in a social historical context. And so it's been, I think, very challenging because the news cycle has also been moving really quickly. And so what I can say, though, I did find the students were willing to take a deep dive into the topic and having that historical background dating really all the way back to the founding of the United States, and to bring those tools with them to look at our situation now in the 21st century has been important. And I think it's something I hope more Americans take the time to do.
And how does the model minority concept fit into this, especially toward immigration?
Well, I think one way it fits in is that in terms of the issue right now about undocumented immigration, many people don't know that among undocumented immigrants are actually Asian immigrants as well. So in other words, that group of immigrants who are coming here for different reasons without authorization includes people from all over the world, but Asians as well. And in fact, the very first undocumented immigrants were the Chinese who came in the 19th century after the United States passed the first set of immigration laws banning groups by race and class.
And Cara, you mentioned this, so much of the representation has morphed now to the smartphone. And you know, where it used to be film, now it's more smartphone. In what way?
Well, I think we can see now the use of cell phones and social media is kind of a continuation of this really long history of using media and trying to create channels of communication where people can broadcast information, where they can organize, where they can show the world social injustices that have occurred. And I think we've seen that with a lot of the recent kind of hashtags, Black Lives Matter, the hashtag that came out after Eric Garner's death, I Can't Breathe. So really there's a really long history connected to those uses.
Is it segregated, though, even within social media? Do you find these distinctions?
I think that there's kind of two parts of it. There's one that is more about creating communication within the community, but there's also a broader way that this information is broadcast because social media can be seen by a larger public. So we just saw the image of Emmett Till, and we know that Emmett Till's mother, during his funeral, decided to have an open casket funeral because she wanted that image to be seen by other Black Americans, but also by the world, to see, you know, what happened to Black children in the South.
What they did to her son, in this case. So how far have we come? I realize that's a very broad question, but Cara, let me start with you. How far have we come in race relations, and how far do we have to go?
I feel like we have a long way to go, but there are things in place to try to help us get there. It's interesting, we were just talking about social media. Recently, I want to say last week on campus, we actually had an incident where a student posted something
Yes, we did.
that affected hundreds of our African American students on this campus. And there was programs like the Balfour Scholars Program, groups, Hudson and Holland, and the Black Culture Center, where students had to come to try to get that support, not to segregate, but to get the services, to have that community where we could come together and be supported because we were not feeling supported in other spaces on campus.
Let's talk about what happened, what was posted.
So a student apparently used a Snapchat filter that said Black History Month is, and they started taking pictures and shots of condoms, of pregnancy tests, of cigarettes, of rolls, trying to insinuate that Black culture and Black history are all of these negative things. And to think that somebody who's on this campus, who's a student here, feels this way, just was kind of like the last straw on the camel's back, that we as Black students already have that idea and feeling and thought of, this is how other people are feeling on campus. This is how somebody who lives down the hallway is feeling. This is somebody who I'm sitting in class with is feeling. This is how the person sitting next to me in the cafeteria is feeling about me. I don't feel like I belong on this campus. I don't feel welcome on this campus. What do I do? And that's where, again, programs like the Balfour Scholars Program, the Black Culture Center, and other programs on this campus have to come together and let the students know that we are supporting you, we are here for you, and we want to do anything we can to try to quell that kind of sentiment on this campus and uplift us and our culture.
Yeah. Ellen, same question to you. Where do you think we've come, and where do we have yet to go?
Well, I'd like to think it's sort of a two-directional thing. I worry that there are so many decisions right now, like you know, the criminalization of course, African Americans, immigrants, Muslims and refugees, and the dismantling of all kinds of institutions that are meant to advance social justice, including voting rights, affirmative action, and so forth. So that part I fear. On the other hand, in the last year, really, I've seen such an amazing groundswell of activism and different communities reaching across lines, different kinds of identities, to work together, again, to further social justice. So we're at a crossroads, but I think as an American, I want to remain hopeful that we can overcome some of the big challenges that we have.
And mentioning what happened on Snapchat just in the past week or two, as a teacher of social media, that kind of thing, what are your reactions to that?
I mean, I think that it's going to be an ongoing battle for social justice and for improving race relations in our country. As a historian, I think it really is going to require addressing deep historical problems that have not been addressed. I was recently looking at a house last year that I was thinking of buying here in Bloomington, and I decided to kind of look at some of the older records of the house. And this is a house that was built in 1947. And when I looked it up, there was a white ordinance on the house here in Bloomington, Indiana.
Wow.
And that history, right, is part of the history of the place that we still live in today.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for being with us. It seems that we have a long way to go, even on this campus, but what strikes me is even after the incident that we had, it does provide an opportunity as well for students who are offended by that, students of all color, to come forward on social media and say so. So it's a rallying cry. Can be.
It can be a rallying
Can
cry.
be, and we hope so. Thank you. That's it for this installment of IU Matters. Thanks to all of our guests for their part in this important conversation. And thanks to our staff behind the scene and to you, our viewers. I'm Ann Ryder. We'll see you back here for our next edition of IU Matters.
IU Matters, Race Relations, is a co-production of Indiana University Office of the Vice Provost for Research, Indiana University Media School, and WTIU